Hey there, Dango Stu here. Today's video is about servicing the fuel pump from a Johnson 30 horsepower outboard and is proudly sponsored by marineengine.com. Now, although I'm doing this job on a Johnson 30 horsepower, these fuel pumps are pretty common across a wide range of outboards. For example, the kit here says that it's valid for engines from 1990 onwards and from 9.9 horsepower to 155 horsepower for both the Johnson and Evinrude outboards. So a pretty big section of outboards out there. This is the fuel pump here on the sides. The first thing we're going to do is take it off and get it over to the bench. To take the fuel pump off, we're going to have to disconnect these three hoses, and then it mounts here through these lower two outside screws. I'll take the screws off first to make it easier to get to the hoses. Between the fuel pump and the engine block is a gasket to seal it. We'll be replacing that, so we can throw that away, but I'll keep it until we make sure the parts are correct. And I'll just put these screws back in the block so I don't lose them. Now I'll just use some side cutters to cut these cable ties. This one's a bit stuck, it's the outlet pipe, so I'll just get some pliers. With hoses like this, I normally try and grip them in the curved section of the pliers and then just give them a little bit of a twist just to break the friction between the barb on the pump and the hose itself. Alright, let's get it to the bench and disassemble it. Before we take the pump apart, we'll just have a quick look at what's inside this kit. This is the part number for the kit here, but I noticed the instructions inside have a different part number. I'm presuming that these instructions maybe were an original part number which has since been superseded, but they're the two. So what we've got is a few of these little check valves, little one-way sort of reed valves, some gaskets. This is a new gasket to replace the one we took off the engine, so we can see straight up they're a match. Then diaphragm, that's a common part that can go wrong. Also got a couple of different O-rings. It actually says in the kit that you may not need all parts depending on what sort of fuel pump you've got. So what I'm going to do is put all that aside for now, and then we'll start taking this one apart and see what we need. As with all things, it's best to pay close attention as you're taking it apart. So for example, you can see here, this inlet barb here comes off, and it comes at an angle between these two screw heads so you can get to them. So that's the way I'll reinstall it when we're finished. I'll quickly pop some gloves on because it's worth noting that obviously fuel sits inside these fuel pumps, so if you've used the outboard recently, or even not so recently, it's going to be full of fuel, so be careful of that. So I'll take the front cover off. Inside here is a mesh screen, a filter that you can clean. So I'm going to pop this out. It looks to me though like the plastic around here is actually broken. So we've got one of our O-rings, our filter mesh. Hopefully it'll show up on the camera, but I'll show you the cracks in this housing. You can see it's cracked here, 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 and over here. So it looks like this cover is going to need replacing as well. Alright, the new cover's arrived now, so we can finally push on with this fuel pump rebuild. I'll leave that aside for the moment, along with the O-ring that goes with it, the little screen and the screw, and we'll just keep disassembling the rest of it. Just here we have another O-ring that I'll remove, and then we'll take this midsection off. There's even a bit of corrosion on these screws, so I'll clean those up as well. Under this cover is a gasket that covers the whole plate, so we'll be replacing that. And then if we take this middle part out, on the inside here we've got a couple of one-way valves here and here, and on the other side we've got the diaphragm that's looking pretty worse for wear. Finally here on the back plate you can see there's a little part here they call air dome support, whatever that means, and a spring. So we have a new one of these. There isn't a new spring, so I've got to keep that, but the rest of this we'll just clean up. I'll start though by taking this old diaphragm off so we can get to both sides of these little one-way check valves. Under the diaphragm there's a second spring here. Inside the diaphragm you'll see there's a little cap here that also goes on top of this spring. I don't have a replacement for this spring or its little cap, so I'll put that somewhere safe. The spring sits here on top of here, and this is the side that the cover threads into, so we'll keep this safe too. This midsection of the pump looks pretty clean, but I'm going to take these old one-way valves out and give it a little bit of a clean anyway before we put the new ones in. We don't have to be too gentle getting the old ones out, obviously. Just going to pull them out, break them in the process, but that's all right. Here are the new ones. And we need to push them through till that little bulge in the shaft there is through and pushed all the way in so it can't pull out again. To help with that, I'm just going to put a little bit of two-stroke oil on it. When putting them in, I'm just going to push it on and push it through from this side. Hopefully you can see there that the wider section that locks it in has come all the way through. So with these, always push them in from this side, don't get the stem in and try and pull the stem out because there's a good chance you'll break it off. Bit of oil on the other one. This one goes in from the opposite side. You can kind of tell which way they'd go round because if I push this one in from this side, it would hit here. So I know this one goes this way and then this one goes the opposite side. All right, just going to wipe a bit of the excess oil off. The diaphragm part is actually a diaphragm and a gasket together. So you'll see they're sort of stuck together, but they're actually two separate bits. We've got replacements for both of these, so I'll put that together now. I'm going to be building this up now from the back of the pump to the front. So from the part that's against the crankcase outwards like this. So next thing is to give this a good clean up. To do that, I'm just going to use a bit more brake cleaner and a little stainless steel brush. There's a little bit of old gasket material here too, so just giving a bit of a scrape with a razor blade at a shallow angle to get that off. Alright, looking a bit better now. Next on this back plate goes the spring and this little dome. I've got a new replacement dome, so I'm going to put the new dome onto the old spring. You'll see in the top here there's a section that the spring goes around and a little hole in the centre. So the spring sits on it and then the dome's long enough to go through the spring and for the shaft of that to fit into that little hole. So that's how that goes. After this we need our new diaphragm and gasket, and the gasket goes down towards that back plate. Next steps to get the old gasket off this top cover plate. So that's come off pretty cleanly. Rebuilding now from the bottom of the pump up, or the inside, the engine side to the outside. We'll put this spring on here. Then this little air dome support, as they call it, goes down into there. Get that sitting straight. Then our gasket. Next thing I'm going to do is lay the diaphragm on. It'll be held up by this spring here, but that's okay for now. Once the diaphragm's on, I want to lay this section here, the spring and the cap, so that it's centered in this circular section here. So I'll pop this diaphragm on. Then we'll take the little cap and put it in the center, and then rest the spring on top of that. Now what I'm going to do is take this midsection. You can see there's a hex section in here, and this is where this female thread goes in. I can hold this from the back like this by pinching it. Then I'm going to drop it on so that this little dome here goes with the spring around it. Next thing on is the new cover plate gasket, then the cover plate itself. Once that's on, and I'm holding a bit of pressure here just to stop the spring pushing it all up, I can put the new O-ring round here, which helps hold it together a little bit. Just got a bit of crud on there now, I'll just get that off. It'll stay in our pump. So, cover on. Now we can screw these down. Before I get the screws back in, what I'm doing is just having a look that I can see all the gasket and diaphragm edges evenly, and you can look through all the holes and they're all lined up. That way you know the diaphragm, your gaskets, all that are in line before you put the screws in. The manual doesn't seem to call for it, but I think you could probably put a little bit of Loctite on the tips of these screws. I don't think it's going to hurt, but I'm just going to snug them up. I don't think they're going to come undone. So this is our little O-ring, a new O-ring around this center female thread here, and screws go here because the bottom two here are the two mounting bolts. Alright, finally back to our new cover, and I'm just going to push this strainer in so it sits reasonably snugly in there, and then we have a new O-ring for that as well. To hold this O-ring in place while I tip it upside down, I'm just going to put a really small bit of rubber grease on it. You don't want to use a lot because you don't want it sort of oozing inside the pump. It's probably not going to be the end of the earth, it'll just get washed away by the fuel eventually, but just a little bit helps. Now what you need to do is position this top cap. So if we lay it on like this, you need to position it so the barb comes between both these fasteners so you can get to them. Although it's slotted for a screwdriver, this little top cover bolt also has a knurled outside so you can undo it with your fingers. The idea there is that it's something you can get to really easily to clean out that filter should it get blocked up. This one last piece that came in the kit we don't need for this particular pump, it's for a different style. And the last bit we'll actually be using is the gasket that goes between the fuel pump and the engine block. So let's go pop it back on. Before we bolt this back on, I'll just mention the center hole here is actually what comes in the back of the pump here. And this is where the pump gets a crankcase vacuum from. So as the motor compresses fuel and air in the crankcase, you'll get a high pressure. Then as the piston comes back up, you'll get a low pressure, blah, blah, blah. And that's what drives the fuel pump in and out. What's slightly different about these pumps to more modern pumps is normally a modern pump just goes in the crankcase and that's it. In this case, however, we also have a second hose coming from the bottom cylinder, so we sort of get these oscillating pressures to drive it with this dual action. With the new gasket, all I'm going to do is hold it on, push the bolts through like this. That way I don't have to fiddle around holding the gasket in place while I get it lined up. There's quite a bit of thickness to this gasket, so I think you can sort of put a fair bit of pressure and just squash it down a little bit. Gaskets don't really work if they're completely crushed, but just putting under a fair bit of pressure I think is good. If you really wanted to, I think you could also use a little bit of Loctite on these bolts. But I'm going to put them in dry for now. Alright, now we're going to reconnect all our hoses. We had the crankcase pressure for the top cylinder coming straight into the body of the pump. Then we have the crankcase pressure for the bottom cylinder coming up here to the back section, the metal section of the pump. Then at the top here we've got the fuel in, so I'll connect that one. And we know this is our fuel in because we simply trace it all the way around to our fuel inlet here. And then finally here, the smallest one, is the fuel out. The fuel out then forks, one goes directly to the carburetor, the other goes directly to the prime start. The last thing I'm going to do is just put a cable tie on each one as a bit of a hose clamp. Once I've got them on, I like to just grab them close with a pair of pliers and just give the pliers a bit of a twist just to ratchet it up 1 or 2 notches tighter. Once that's done, just chop them off. You can actually get little flush cut pliers specifically for cutting these really close, Saves you having any sharp edges to cut yourself on. They're a nice tool if you can get one. Alright, and there we go. One newly serviced fuel pump ready for action. There's one final pretty important step when you do any sort of work like this, whether it's your fuel pump, fuel hoses, carburetors, whatever, and that's to squeeze the primer bulb until it's firm and then look for leaks. Obviously fuel leaks are pretty dangerous. You don't want, a stray spark, heat from the engine or whatever to ignite it, so you want to make sure everything's bone dry after it's got full pressure, and then you're pretty confident you're good to go. Alright, well thanks for watching. I hope this video helps you if you're looking to service your own fuel pump. Next video with this motor, we'll be getting on and doing more on the lower unit again. Alright, well take care and I'll catch you then. See ya.